You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, a new oil and gas field is approved in the North Sea containing 5.5 million barrels of oil. The government considers options to keep energy prices down for households, with the energy price cap rise to be announced tomorrow. And a deal to help end deforestation has missed its first deadline just months after it was signed at COP26. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, the North Sea has for a long time been a source of oil and gas for the UK, but drilling for fossil fuels is a dirty business. And in its COP26 commitments, the UK government has promised to be a world leader in tackling climate change. But now a new oil and gas field in the North Sea has been approved by the UK government. Called Abigail, it will contain 5.5 million barrels of oil equivalent, which campaigners say is too small to justify the extraction. Sky's climate correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter has been speaking to the Oil and Gas Authority about the future of drilling in the North Sea and has this report.
We're right in the middle of the Cormorty Firth at the moment. Invergordon behind us.
On the northeast coast of Scotland, there is a stretch of water that is home to the ghost rigs. These extraordinary structures brought here from the oil and gas fields of the North Sea, some for repairs, others left to rust. For boat operator David Grant, they are symbols of an industry in transition.
Lots changed over the years here. The rigs were built here and now they're being taken apart.
Now they're being taken apart here, yeah, and I suppose they're going on to renewables now as well. You know, well, it's all wind now, isn't it?
For those rigs that remain in operation, the other challenge is cleaning up. Drilling and extraction is a dirty, carbon-intensive business.
The UK's North Sea oil and gas industry is supposed to be halving its operational carbon emissions by 2030 and getting to net zero by 2050. But when you get up close to these things and you see just how huge and complicated they are, you also get a sense of just how challenging that decarbonisation process is going to be.
But whatever the difficulties, Port Director Rory Gunn is convinced fossil fuels have staying power, even as he shows us the new wind turbines he's helping to build.
I think that if you look at the amount of products that we use on a day-to-day basis that are only there because of oil and gas, and you look at the challenges we have on energy supply in the UK, as we see with our rising utility bills, etc., I think there has to be a grown-up discussion and a realisation that oil and gas is essential, and it will be for decades to come.
That is exactly the calculation the government has made. Its regulator, the Oil and Gas Authority, continues to approve new projects in the North Sea, most recently an oil and gas field called Abigail.
If the UK is a climate change leader, why on earth are we even considering approving new fields?
I understand the argument. It's a difficult and very complex situation to come to the right answer on. But if we stop new developments, the UK will just become more dependent on imports and we'll reduce our own security of supply options.
Campaigners disagree. The only route to both energy security and net zero targets, they say, is the rapid end of fossil fuels.
There is absolutely no room for growing the supply of oil and gas in the UK or anywhere. International Energy Agency, the world's leading energy think tank, declared twice last year that there's enough oil and gas in the world in production right now to take us beyond the limits of the Glasgow Climate Agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement. We just don't need to look for any more.
The tension over a declining industry that helped build our modern world is playing out now in the North Sea. The ghost rigs of Cromarty Firth, a reminder of the uncertainty ahead. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in Scotland.
Well, new data released to us at the Daily Climate Show has revealed that North Sea oil and gas production in 2021 was the dirtiest it's been for 5 years when records began. The research by Rystad also shows that despite a recent pledge to halve emissions, oil and gas extracted in the UK releases more CO2 per barrel than many other developed oil-producing economies. So let's take a look at some of that data now. And although absolute carbon emissions from North Sea operations are falling, projections suggest that the intensity of those carbon emissions rose by 15% last year compared to the year before. Now, that's mainly because of major repair works to a pipeline, but also because it's getting harder to extract oil and gas from ageing reserves. 13% of the emissions produced are from flaring. That's a controversial method of burning off waste or other unwanted gases. The carbon intensity of the UK oil and gas industry has been improving since 2018, but the figures for 2021 show a rise of 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide per barrel of oil equivalent, meaning the UK's oil and gas extraction operations produced 23 kilograms of carbon dioxide per barrel of oil equivalent last year. Now, that is the highest since records began. The Oil and Gas Authority has told Sky News that although it does consider emissions intensity, it's focused on bringing down total carbon emissions in line with industry commitments. And I'll be discussing some of the concerns around North Sea oil a little bit later in the show with Fatima Ibrahim from the Green New Deal UK and Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield, Michael Jacobs. Now for some of the day's other climate news. And 5 Insulate Britain activists have been jailed at the High Court after breaching an injunction by protesting on the M25 last year. National Highways launched legal action against the group after defying an order banning them from blocking roads on the motorway. They'll spend between 24 and 42 days in jail. 11 others were given suspended sentences. The UK's tallest birds, the common crane, have had their most successful year since the 17th century. The latest breeding survey showed that there are a record-breaking 72 pairs, with 65 birds breeding 40 chicks. There are now estimated to be over 200 common cranes in the UK. But their habitat is degrading at a faster rate than forests. Today is the first United Nations-sanctioned World Wetlands Day. Almost 90% of the delicate ecosystems have been degrading since the 1700s. Drainage and climate change continue to threaten their existence. The energy regulator Ofgem is expected to announce the energy cap rise tomorrow morning, bringing it forward by a week. The government is now considering how to keep household bills down, and the impact of climate policy could feature in that debate. Ofgem's announcement will coincide with a decision from the Bank of England on whether to further raise interest rates. And we'll have full coverage on those announcements tomorrow here on the Daily Climate Show. The government has been urged to stop making owners of electric vehicles who can't charge at home pay 4 times more tax for their power. Campaigners want the current 20% rate on energy at public charge points to match the 5% domestic rate, which applies to drivers who have the facilities at home. More than 74,000 people have signed an online petition insisting ministers make electric vehicles fairer and more affordable before it's too late. Now, deforestation was one of the key commitments at COP26 and one of the first announcements at the summit in Glasgow. But now Sky News can reveal the deforestation deal has missed its first deadline. So let's take a look at that in more detail. And over the past 20 years, tree cover has decreased by 10%, and the rate of deforestation is estimated at 10 million hectares per year. At COP26, more than 100 leaders representing 85% of the world's forests committed to stopping and reversing deforestation by 2030. Now, the commitment is backed by £14 billion of public and private funding. Included in that, a group of donor countries promised $500 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo to protect the Congo Basin, which absorbs 4% of the world's carbon dioxide, but is suffering widespread forest loss. Well, our climate change reporter, Victoria Seabrook, is here with me now. So, Victoria, what exactly has gone wrong here?
Well, yes. So in return for this $500 million, about £370 million that was promised to the DRC by a group of donor countries, signed by Boris Johnson to some fanfare during COP26, in return, the DRC was supposed to publish an audit of all of its existing logging concessions, permits, effectively. And the idea is that this would help to weed out some of those that were illegal. So that's those which are not ensuring biodiversity protection or protection for Indigenous and frontline communities. And so the reason why this audit matters is because campaigners say you can't start to tackle the illegal deforestation if you don't even have a handle on the numbers. And they believe it to be perhaps 22 illegal contracts, maybe in the 60s and 70s. Greenpeace Africa, they say that this was a botched deal designed to sort of grab headlines full of glitzy statements. And they say that this was always doomed to fail, this deal, because it wasn't conditional on actually stopping all new logging concessions. On the other hand, others would say, well, none of this money has actually changed hands yet, and that shows how the deal is working, because if commitments aren't filled, if these conditions and terms aren't met, the money isn't flowing, and that's right, that's how it should work. Now, it's still early days. The deal was only signed in November, and this audit was supposed to be published by the end of last year. It's missed that deadline, but of course it may still be published. It's due to be soon, but this is how we start to test whether these deals are really going to work.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Fatima Ibrahim from the Green New Deal UK and Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield, Michael Jacobs. So hello to both of you. Good evening, good evening. So first of all, if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil and gas. The words of International Energy Chief Fatih Birol last year. It was a sentiment echoed recently by Alok Sharma, who leads the UK government's climate policy. But now we learn of a new North Sea oil field being approved, and the UK Oil and Gas Authority continue to argue for new developments. So, Fatima, first of all, what do you make of the approval of this new oil field?
I mean, it's unconscionable that we are having this conversation in 2022 about new oil fields. We have a huge task ahead of us to transition away from dirty fossil fuels and to be opening new oil fields that really the UK taxpayer isn't set to gain much from it. It won't create that many jobs. The only winners are the corporations and the companies involved. And it sets us even further back from being able to meet our climate targets when we have huge opportunities to invest in renewables that will give us energy security because we can create them at home. It will help us reduce our energy bills in this energy crisis. So, I mean, it's just hard for me to understand why the government continues to approve these new dirty fossil fuel projects. And this is just one of 39 that they're set to approve this year.
Well, Michael, the government has addressed this issue, haven't they, of investments in the North Sea? And when they do, they talk about how they're working hard to reduce the demand for fossil fuels. But in the meantime, they say that there will be ongoing demand for oil and gas over the coming years as we transition towards lower carbon alternatives. And they talk about this issue of energy security and jobs as well. So what do you make of that argument?
Well, there is an energy security argument. We get a lot of our energy from places that are relatively unstable abroad, although, to be perfectly honest, energy supplies have not been that unstable. But we have seen, as we are experiencing at the moment, that producer nations of oil and gas can restrict supply, increase the price, and then, of course, that has a huge impact, as it is now, on the cost of living, as your report earlier showed. So there is an energy security argument, but the climate argument is the one about the future of the entire planet. And as the International Energy Agency said last year, and as somebody has said on your package, there is no room for additional energy production of fossil fuels. We are going to exceed the carbon budget that will limit global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees with all the oil and gas that is already been explored and is in production. So this is really where the kind of the sheep get sorted from the goats. It's very easy, and all politicians are now very happy to say we should have more renewable energy. The difficult thing, which some politicians, including this government, as is seen today, have not been willing to say, is we must also have less fossil fuel energy. And there really is no room. The climate science is very clear about this. There is no room for further extraction if we're going to hold global temperature to safe levels. So this is a real test for the government, and I'm afraid it hasn't passed that test today.
And Fatima, the government might argue that this latest oil field, Abigail, contains only 5.5 million barrels of oil equivalent. It's not huge. And they would say, we feel we can tolerate these projects and still meet our climate targets, which are ambitious.
But this project doesn't even touch the sides if we're talking about energy security or providing energy for the taxpayers. It's just simply not going to provide or solve any of the problems that we have. So this doesn't make business sense. It doesn't make economic sense. I mean, it's really hard to understand and make the case that this energy project is one that's worth investing in, and it's worth taking the risk of us falling further into the climate crisis, because it actually isn't solving any of the problems that the government is saying that it's trying to solve. So it's a bad business project, simply, even if we don't care about the climate.
And very, very briefly, Michael, the government would say it can hit its targets. They will point out look at the amount of money that's going into wind power in this country, for example. We're doing the right thing there.
We are doing the right thing on wind power, although there's not enough going into onshore wind. But the simple fact remains that new exploration of oil and gas increases the global total of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. And that is not possible within the budgets that the government has set itself to. It's not just about this country, it's about the global total. We're very unlikely to consume much of the energy from this new field. It'll go into the global supply, and that is exceeding the carbon budget that will allow global temperature to be kept to safe levels. And that is the simple, hard facts of climate change as we're experiencing it now.
I'm going to crack on with the next subject now, if that's all right, because we want to talk about a Freedom of Information request from the Carbon Brief website, which today revealed details of a briefing on climate change given to Boris Johnson shortly after his arrival in Downing Street. Now, the Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, laid out the science of global warming, the role of carbon and the devastating likely future impacts. And now, we're not all lucky enough to have a personal briefing from the country's top scientists. So what is the best way to get through to people, whether that's world leaders or the public at large? So, Fatima, we haven't all got the Chief Scientific Advisor to run us through a few slides, have we? So what do you think the best way to communicate the message on climate change is?
Yeah, I mean, I had a wonderful conversation today with the head of the Institute of Physics about how, we need to be better about communicating the nuances of climate science. We can sometimes, extrapolate top lines from the climate science that don't build trust with the public, whether it's like we've got 10 years left to save the world, or not even communicating using the right terms, talking about 1.5 degrees when 1.5 degrees doesn't mean anything to the average person. And so I think we could be doing better about taking the time to explain, the risks that are posed by inaction, but also talking about the solutions, pointing towards a vision of the future that people can tangibly see, and not just speaking about the problems, and the wealth of knowledge that exists in both science and technology about what the future can look like. And we can do that by working with scientists. And the media could also be better platforming scientists because they are great communicators and they are trustworthy communicators. I think the film Don't Look Up was a really great example of how, scientists are currently just stuck in this room, know the evidence, have the facts, and are just trying to get it out there. And we could be platforming them because scientists are trusted across the public, maybe more so than, activists are.
That's so interesting. And getting the message over to the public is clearly really important, Michael, isn't it? But also to politicians. And you know all about advising politicians, don't you? So what's the way to get your message across to those who can play a real role in shaping policy?
I think it depends very much on their prior level of knowledge. I was a bit shocked when I looked at these slides and the email exchanges that accompanied them. Well done to Carbon Brief for the Freedom of Information request to get hold of them. They were really climate science 101. This was not about the economic costs and benefits of different technologies and solutions to the climate crisis. This was really about the fact that greenhouse gas emissions cause temperature to rise, and temperature rises have huge, devastating environmental and social effects. And I was really rather shocked that the Prime Minister needed such a basic introduction introduction to climate science and climate impacts when he became Prime Minister. Really, we should expect our politicians to be better informed. But well done for him for asking for that briefing. Well done for the scientists to explain it to him, and it obviously had some effect. He changed his view. And in the end, we've got to live with the politicians we have, at least for the moment, and we've got to work with them to get them not just to understand the science, but also themselves how to communicate it in ways that they feel will bring the public along. That's in the end the point. The politicians will respond to the public. So it's also about how we talk to the public.
Yeah, and a very brief last thought on that, Fatima. Some people just don't want to hear the message, especially when it can seem quite grim.
I'm just going to end with what Michael said, which is, Boris Johnson is a populist. Why did he ask for this report? Because when he became Prime Minister in 2019, we had this mass mobilizations. He knew the public was concerned about climate change. He wanted to know more and be seen to be acting on it. So actually, the best way we convince our leaders is by taking to the streets and showing them what's the most important priority we want them to act on.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Fatima Ibrahim, Michael Jacobs, really interesting to get your take on things. Thanks very much indeed.